Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today for a replay of my presentation I did for the IMPACCT and Mobile and Clinical Trials Conference. It was originally supposed to be live in Boston on the 5th. Due to the pandemic and everything going on, it was quickly became a virtual conference. So I'm going to go through the recording of that here on this instant replay, and I want to make it available as part of my digital health innovation second session. It's been a big gap in time since the first and second, and it's eerily reminding of after the first session I made note of or a call to action for PTs to innovate, and if they weren't going to innovate, their waiting rooms would end up being quiet, and I did not make that prediction, knowing at all that everything would essentially be shut down. So the timing on this is good to actually look back over the last several months and see how PT practices did adopting telehealth, what some of the barriers are. There may be some overlap between the first session and the second session. I will go quickly into my story and how it relates to my experience with digital medicine and the call to action for PTs to innovate. So without further delay here, let's jump into the replay. And you can always reach out to me after when this webinar ends if you have any questions about what you'll learn today. So let's get started. Okay, I want to thank you, Craig, for moderating this event, and a big thank you to Madison Saint at Hanson Wade for all your help getting me ready for this event. I'd also like to thank my friends at the Digital Medicine Society for building out this expert speaker list that they have on their great site, where Hanson Wade Group discovered me to present here today. And with that, I'd like to give special thanks to Jen Goldsack of Dime for the ongoing encouragement and consistent nudge to help me in trying to innovate PT and engage more of my colleagues. As you might have seen in my intro, I'm the founder of SmartMovesPT. I am also the consulting lead at PTC Physical Therapy Consulting and the co-founder at Enable Us, which is a digital startup and mission-driven project around supporting life after stroke. I'm also the past co-founding vice president of the PFO Research Foundation, and I do work with the American Heart and Stroke Association with Teddy's team here in New England. I have no disclosures other to say that I'm always actively looking for innovation partners. I'd like to first cover the agenda briefly here so you know what's in store. This keynote may have been updated since my last submission, so I'll be sure to get anyone who wants the latest version on my site through the IMPACCT after presentation. I'm sure that's going to be made available in recorded form too. So I want to tell you what I've learned as both a patient and a provider. And before I go over the agenda, that's what follows. I believe that we are at a transition point like never before, especially in rehab, where we now have the ability to collect and utilize patient data previously left unmonitored. And we can now fill these missing data gaps, especially for capturing movement. But how do we do it, and what's getting in our way of innovating PT? So you see the agenda items here. I want to really spend the bulk of the time focusing on the patient perspective, but I think we have to cover some of the barriers first, and let's begin to find out. So I want to start actually with the poll. And if you look here now, I might rely on Madison here to queue up the poll, but if you look here, you'll see me in my garage band, as I call it. This was early in April. I'm sporting my 80s MacGyver haircut in my garage, getting ready for what became a fairly regular garage band learning session. Despite 2 failed attempts from trying to convince my barber it was safe to come in my garage with masks, I didn't end up getting my first haircut till July. So here's the poll. I want to know what interests you. There's been a lot of talk around Parkinson's. A little bit touched on stroke and TBI. I want to know if you're interested in what the future patient in PT could look like, or that guy in the garage band. So let's see. I don't know if this is going to work, but let's jump in, and I'll tell you on the slides to follow what I learned in GarageBand. And I'd like to jump right into a little bit more about my why, because every good engaging patient experience for me starts with finding out their why, or what moves them. Why are they coming to see me? And I was inspired in day one of this conference with our patient panel, although the other two Daves also had great insight. What Mima said really resonated with me when, and I'm certainly not quoting her, but she said, when you put your heart in and pair it with science, you can impact change. So I wanted to tell you about my heart for a moment to share my why as well here. So who am I? My name's Dave Dansereau. I'm a father, a husband, a PT practicing for over 20 years. I consider myself a stroke survivor, and I definitely became a patient advocate. I'm going to be brief here with my story and not bore you with the condition, rather focus on how mine compares to the patient of the future who you'll meet shortly, and how the digital tools we now have available could change the way we deliver care and overcome many of the obstacles I faced. As you might gather from the photo, I had plenty of motivation to get better after my stroke. Those are my children in the photo, all under the age of 7 at the time of my stroke. So to recover, I hacked my own stroke recovery at home with telehealth, and I used version 1 tools like Skype and FaceTime, and with early consumer wearables like the Nike Fuel Band, and a homegrown solution that involved telehealth, hacking a Wii board, and challenging my kids to help me do better. And a little sidebar here, if you want to be humbled, certainly have your 5-year-old talk smack about how he beat you on the Wii ski jump. So fast forward to the present day. Even though I've been in clinical care forever, I only attended my first mobile clinical trials conference less than a year ago, shortly after joining Dime. And my why for being obsessed with patient engagement remains finding better connected patient care solutions and engagement technologies and collaboration so other families don't need to suffer the same delays in care our family did. So since the early days of my MacGyver rehab and with tech, I had seen little innovation in the PT space and realized how important those tools were to my own successful recovery. So in that part fuels my passion. I do write a lot about patient engagement on LinkedIn if you want to follow me and read those stories. So I hope this presentation demonstrates for you how I believe digital medicine can offer a better pathway for many patients to connect health through movement. This is where I see the future of digital medicine having the best fit, and rehab professionals should have a seat at this table, or at least in my garage band for now. So less than a year ago, when I attended my first mobile conference, I was the only PT in the room, and I hope to change that moving forward with today's presentation as a start. But first, you need to know what launched this passion and moonshot mission for me and my family. And that was this article that appeared in the New York Times. This was the headline of the New York Times front page article in the business section that said popular but not science. So you see, the writer from this article reached out to me after I was doing some writing online looking for solutions and trying to Google what best care pathway was for me. And after my stroke from a congenital heart defect known as a PFO, or a patient foramen invalid, I rapidly learned there was no consensus in the PFO field for patients seeking answers and care. And depending on who which specialist you spoke to, a cardiologist or neurologist, the diagnosis and treatment pathways would diverge and lead you down vastly different options. So none of these options, medical management or device closure, were backed up by data at that point, and that our patients like myself didn't have access to guide their treatment. So the patient perspective was definitely missing. I really want to focus on that. All I knew at the time was hockey skates and Coumadin didn't mix well, and I wanted to have another option. I'll compare and contrast my situation with the future PT patient on the slide. But here's really what fired me up at the bottom of this slide is the subheading, a device to avert strokes lacks proof that it helps. So figure this, I had opted for heart surgery to have a septo-occluder placed square in the center of my heart, and it's being reported smack dab on the New York Times that it might not help me. We are going to let the story sit for a bit and move on to telehealth and how it helped me and how I believe it's a pivotal component to moving digital trials into the patient engagement arena. So that's kind of a bump, rough transition into telehealth, but I want to tell you, give you this kind of the primer on the scope of PT and telehealth. So prior to the COVID pandemic, reimagining healthcare was moving slow, mainly because of economic incentives were not aligned with the vision. And then suddenly COVID, with COVID, it's time to move past reimagining and begin recreating. So in the next few slides, I'll provide these insights and maybe the impediments that led to the slow adoption of PT and telehealth, and the changes that came with the COVID-19 pandemic, and hope now on how the PT of the future could be positioned to be the greatest ally to the adoption of digital medicine if properly implemented and trained. At the time of the most recent APTA, American Physical Therapy Association survey, you see at the bottom of the screen, 98% of PTs reported using no telehealth technologies prior to the pandemic. So I was in that 2% minority, and in fact, I had been doing telehealth for over 13 years, shortly following my stroke, and then moving it into my own rehab with my patients. So one thing you should know is that telehealth for PT was not, was originally excluded from legislation prior to COVID. And with a lot of lobbying and letter writing, like you see here in the slide, we were able to get e-visits at least covered by CMS on March 17th. And then it took till April 30th for legislation provisions to approve PT for full billing of telehealth with parity to what we would normally do in the clinic. So it's important to note, though, here that these are still temporary changes. So today, in addition to spending time advocating for telehealth, my days are mostly spent treating patients remotely, and I've been doing that since the 13th of March. I've been listening to town hall meetings with our state leadership and with my EHR vendors, and where I have the most fun is actually learning the digital lingo and innovation with my garage band on Fridays. So I've also been engaging local universities on training the new health professionals on the benefits of embracing virtual digital therapy. So how did we do as a physical therapy profession weathering the COVID storm? So without a solid digital strategy, as I outlined, it wasn't quite good, quite frankly. And during this time, you can see on the grid, that PT volume dropped by about 60%. This, I noticed around that same time that private telehealth PT provider practice groups on Facebook went from about 3,000 users to over 8,000 members, which maybe a handful of those prior were actively practicing telehealth. And if you want more charts and graphs, maybe take a closer look at the timeline on the APTA site. Their June 2020 report is entitled The Impact of COVID-19 on the PT Profession. And you can reach out to me if you'd like a copy, because sometimes getting information from the APTA site can be a little bit troubling. You have to access, you only get like one free article a month if you're not a member. So I look at this graph, you can see there's a lesson here. Certainly 30% of all PT practices surveyed had 0 visits during this period. That's kind of scary. And the lesson here is that we definitely need real digital solutions. So this graph to me, and I'll ask the questions, this graph show a path to recovery or a rapid disaster if another storm surge hits. Part of that resurgence, you can see we kind of started to adopt telehealth, but when you see that key where there's a wheelchair, that was about the time that elective surgeries started to reopen. So if we have another spike or another storm, as I put it, we could be in a world of hurt, because we totally rely on referrals in many cases from elective surgeries, and we have a lot of work to do. So my prediction along that line is we need to innovate and match patient needs and desires, especially now. Patients are asking. Trends in the industry and digital space all around us are showing that patients want this. They want mobile technologies and solutions. So you need to meet your patients on mobile, which is convenient, fast, affordable, connected. And as these technologies to remotely measure and securely communicate and educate effectively to exchange vital health information and biometrics improve, I'm hopeful that a new gold standard will change and away from the dated goniometer, for starters, that PTs still use. And soon, hopefully, in rehab, we'll see some change in embracing digital innovation. So I use a case in point. If you look at the case for heart rate, blood glucose, blood pressure, typically previously gathered only in a doctor's office, that vital data can now be collected, trended, and shared through an app and a smartphone. So what's been holding PT providers back? So I believe if PT clinical practices emerge from this current crisis looking like they did going in, we will have missed an opportunity to grow and learn and really, I believe my second opinion, which I'll show in the upcoming slide, will come true. So part of the problem in PT is we let legislation define who we are and how we practice, and that has to change. You can see some of the bullet points here, the barriers we experience. But moving forward, if we do not position ourselves as the movement experts, we'll have abandoned our greatest gift, which is our gift of knowledge about how the body and brain work and how they work in health and disease, and how we can use technology in our toolboxes to impart that wisdom even remotely to help patients heal their bodies and better yet stay well. So my biggest, I do write a lot, as I mentioned, on LinkedIn, and one of my biggest things that I write about is we have these siloed, old, dated EMRs. Some of them were, came to light or were built way back in like the first and second Bush era here in the U.S. We do have, certainly lack of state and federal reimbursement that has slowed down adoption. And, we haven't kept up with the outside the clinic walls. And if you look outside the clinic walls, you see that telehealth and technology could certainly, if we adapted it, we could definitely make PT more fit too. If we look at online banking, food delivery, smart homes, even Norm Abrams shows you how to connect sensors and make your house more efficient. We look at the fitness industry is way ahead of us. Peloton, if you remember, during March, early shutdown, there were up to 10,000 riders in some of the popular classes on a single class. That to me is unbelievable. Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook, even with their Facebook portal, are innovating. We've seen telemedicine growth in other industries, other primary care providers, but not so much in PT. So where was fit? We need to become the leaders in this digital space, and we need to connect with some of the industry partners that are here today at this conference. So if we look, here's my prediction. Providers are not looking at going out into the community via digital means to be able to connect. And I use this with some of my private practice physicians and also my PTs that I do some consultation with. And I said, I believe that most PT practices are going to go the way of Blockbuster if they don't innovate and make patient engagement a priority. And you look at, Blockbuster compared to Netflix these days. So there's a lot of barriers we have in our way. MIPS, I do again, could do a whole presentation on MIPS, but go to my LinkedIn site to my articles to read more. Declining enrollment, high cost of education, volume-based care. We're not ready to move to value-based, and certainly digital can help. And there's a lot of PTs, quite frankly, that are burnt out and frustrated due to a lot of cuts that we've seen happen. So let's jump into the patient perspective, because this really, to me, certainly I've been asked to ask the question, what bothers you the most about? And I always start with that. And it is time now in the new, patient engagement era to start if we're going to start the new decade, it's time to start to ask the patient. And we've been doing a good job talking about that today. So let's dive into a couple examples here. The thing that resonates for me the most, certainly, I do a lot of advocacy around stroke. You saw that there were a lot of patients during COVID and even now that have been locked out of therapy. Many patients have been told that their clinic is just closed and they don't have remote options. Right around the time that everything was shutting down, I just come back from the International Stroke Conference, and the themes that were coming around that were that the future of stroke recovery is certainly in the home, and there appears to be a real home field advantage to rehab at home, and I totally agree with that. And one of the mission-driven projects that I'm working on is called Enable Us, and you can check on our website to learn more. But a survey we did when we asked the patients, we found that 75% of patients want to text. 82% want to open virtual visits and have that available to them. 90% want to know more about their stroke and their condition. They want more digital options for rehab, and they want digital solutions that connect care with their provider where and when they want. So we have a lot of ways to go on this. You see, this is an actual message from a de-identified message, that is from a patient, that shows that, hey, cool, I have forms printed and filled out tonight. I will then have to figure out how to fax them. And do you know anyone with the DeLorean? So that's so fitting. That makes me laugh even when I read it, because we haven't adapted. We need, especially now, touchless technologies to pull PHI information into the patient record and just to make it easier, a better experience. And I surveyed the minority of my patients right now. Many of my patients, I do work with patients with MS, stroke, PD, and elderly population. They're at high risk, and I'm also an ideal candidate to stay remote, but probably 85% was my latest poll say they have no intention of coming back to the private clinic until they know more, and unless it's absolutely necessary, they don't plan on coming back in. So down at the bottom, I just included this because this is sort of some outcome measures that we routinely capture in clinic. And you can see a lot of those have digital solutions, but they don't connect with those dated EMRs. So, like the timed up and go, sit stand, 4-stage balance, and gait speed, all those methods, we capture those functional outcomes manually, and it's time consuming. We could automate that process for sure. So let's jump into my patient example, and for the patient with stroke. This patient has worked extremely hard to build back her mobility and fitness. She has regained her independence that she previously felt slipping away. And then something happened. Her husband got hospitalized, in that white bar there as another de-identified correspondence that expresses her concern about she twisted her knee and fell. She wants to let me know that the x-rays are negative, but she has concerns because now she's going home without support. Her husband is going to remain in the hospital. So this email expresses how, this is a patient needing help in a remote support in a real life situation. And previously, I've worked hard to get these digital measures when she could come into the clinic, but these biomarkers and things we talked about today, these we need to know now, and they could help this patient with PD and others remain safe in their homes and fill in data gaps. And we talked about technologies for gait and cardiovascular monitoring, ways to measure brain activity and tremor and joint range of motion and ankle mobility. Certainly as a PT would be of utmost help for me. And we also would be interested in looking at sleep quality and how that presented for the next day's therapy. So this is also all consuming to me, and when I hear a patient say my Apple Watch tells me more about how I'm doing than my neurologist, and that's so true. Some of my patients wait for 15 minutes 2 times a year for the biannual checkups with their neurologist, only to walk away with more questions than answers. And I can relate to that because I used my Apple Watch in my own rehab and returning eventually to running a marathon, because no one could tell me what I should and shouldn't be doing. So at least it gave me some peace of mind and biometric data to work with. So if we're going to jump in to the patient of the future, I want to contrast and compare my own health situation with my futuristic patient here, Tony Stark. And if I could, certainly steal Craig's line, imagine where the puck is going for a second. Let's just imagine that this is what a new virtual visit could look like in telehealth with some remote monitoring tools. So let's compare and contrast. Here I am on the left, Tony's in his suit. And, Tony and I had the same heart defect, a hole in our heart. So the difference is mine was caused by birth, and his was caused by a rebel grenade. If you're a fan of the Avengers, that rebel grenade sent a fragment through his atrial septum, and he was lucky enough to have another captured scientist create a knock reactor to serve as a tool to save fragments from damaging his heart further. So you have to see the Iron Man movies, I guess, to get the full scoop on that. But my hole was plugged by a medical device, a septal occluder. Remember I told you I was in that gray area. And then today, Tony has constant monitoring his vitals and has his AI monitored assistant, Jarvis, to always tell him how he's doing. So I have an emergency card I keep in my pocket in case I run into trouble with my own device. I believe the 800 number still works there. So I have faith and hope that nothing bad happens based on the decision my family and I had to make because of the rare condition that put me in this gray area. So we have the power now to color in these gray areas with vivid data numbers driven by, patient input and engagement. So this is what gets me excited, but in the meantime, I'll have to continue to wear my Apple Watch, watching more Avenger movies, and they inspire me to keep connected with my family at least. So, and by the way, you'll only get this if you've watched the Avenger series, but if Tony and I walk back in time to 1947 with Captain America, and they walk through a PT clinic instead of Tony Stark's dad lab, if we warp forward and came back out, we wouldn't know we came back into the future because they'd probably still be using that same damn goniometer from 1940s as we're using now. So I firmly believe in mobile clinical trials and patient engagement, and it can help innovate PT. It can help address disparities in healthcare. It can help with limited transportation. We certainly have to address the social determinants, but we can definitely do that with connected preventative care. And the next decade future patient slide here, we're not far off from that. That's actually a patient visit when I was going to queue up my digital goniometer and pull it over the top to assess Tony. He said, wait a minute, and he had Jarvis just pulling all that biometric data that you see. And that's data that I pulled out just to show you that that's data from my own Apple Watch. So it does a good job of nudging now. How do we bring that data in that to make it meaningful for the patient? We've have a text thread back to Tony. He's telling me, and that's true, that check mark that you see is, I get that data now. I can see how patients are doing their exercises. I securely text. But a lot of the remote, automatic patient data would be helpful to me, and that's just not flowing right now. I think that is very important for if we're going to ever achieve the quadruple aim, because we have new practitioners coming out that are going to be in major debt, and they're going to be burdened by what's going on, and they might not be wise to the methods and the new technologies that they have at their disposal now. We have to get them into their hands and train them, because unless we have that improved clinical experience, and without that positive provider side experience, the other three healthcare aims are sort of dead on arrival. So I wish I had more time to spend on this topic, but I can tell you my call to action is I've been doing this for years. I can't do it alone. And as reference to that, in my last, only other clinical trials conference, I was the only PT in the room. So I hope to change that. But if I can take just a moment on this last slide and show some of my, I have to say what happens in GarageBand stays in GarageBand. But if we come back to that opening slide, here's what I learned from talking to some of the other leaders in this space is that, advances in sensor technologies are here. We could definitely use these tools to help us measure motor symptoms and movement quality, especially for, as we've learned today, progressive neurological conditions. And we can use that to capture data at home. And I've learned that these devices are now low burden and can measure long-term outcomes with less friction. And if we're not going to start listening and innovating, there's this common theme that I'm learning from interviewing folks in the garage band, is that innovation is coming from outside of the field. And I think that's a good thing. We desperately need that. But, companies like Hinge Health and Sword and Physera that just partnered with Omada, if we don't innovate, our PT voice is going to be lost. But it's happening all around us. And it's so many times that someone who's walked into the PT clinic and saw, they came away with their big idea because they could, basically saw how, PT should be done better. So I think I'm going to wrap up. Hopefully I'll save a minute or two for questions. But I'm going to end with this, that the PT patient experience and the PT of the past can't be our future, can't help us build a future. And as there's a call to action. Society's going to need us now more than ever. We're going to have alternatives to surgery. COVID is going to have long-term implications for the aftermath, if you will, of patients needing PT. And you can see that, just jokingly, that a little message there from Tony back to me. He said, "I'm back on the ball and feel great. Thank you. Let me know if you need any help innovating PT." And I think that if we take a lesson away from all this, we can definitely do some remote improvements to the way we deliver care. And if there's no questions, I'd love to tell you how I could help with Tony Fauci throwing out that first pitch with remote tools. But I want to thank everyone. And if I could just say this, I'd like you to, leave with this. Remember what Craig said: pass the puck where the player is going, not where they've been. So I want to thank you, and you can connect with me back in the IMPACCT forum here, or certainly here's my contact information. So if I have a few minutes, I'd love to take some questions. Thank you.
So thanks for watching. This was actually filmed live and then had to be recorded for the IMPACCT Mobile in Clinical Trials Conference that was originally supposed to be presented up in Boston, but then went virtual the first week here in August. So I just wanted to, touch on a few of the points from the conference that I was asked to present the future of PT, and I hope I was trying to cover that from the patient perspective and also talk about the need for PTs to innovate in our profession. And I tried to bring in my own patient story, as you may have seen in the video. It started with a presentation, as part of the presentation, it started with my story about how, there were more questions than answers in my own care. And unfortunately, unlike Tony Stark, as I mentioned at the closing, if something goes wrong with the device in my own heart, all I have is this card, and the 1-800 number at best puts me on hold. So patients want more. I hope the takeaway that you got from watching this presentation is we are in a modern era of digital everything else but healthcare and medicine, and we need to innovate, especially in PT. And I was partly joking at the end, if it's lights out for Tony, he can replace this. I can't quickly replace the devices in my heart. I need to know what are the best practices, and historically we don't even have a patient registry after all these years for devices that patients have chosen to put in their hearts. So we need to do better. This will eventually be part of a digital innovation guidebook that I'm doing for PT professionals. This will be actually part of the recorded second session. So definitely reach out to me. I hope to reach out with this recorded session to my PFO community for advocacy, and also to engage the Enable Us community around better supporting life after stroke, which I did mention was one of the condition or patient perspectives we covered in this webinar. So that's, I think, all for now. I just wanted to let you know that the tools are there, and I have jokingly mentioned about Dr. Fauci. We have the tools to remotely measure and monitor. You showed him trying to throw out the first pitch, and I was jokingly saying that I'd like to address how I could have helped him prepare for that first throw. So we have the tools to be able to connect health and to digitalize and innovate physical therapy for the next generation, but we have to start now. So thanks for watching.